Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome back to Third Culture Convos, where third culture kids sit back, relax, and talk about global issues that affect third culture kids and how they identify and deal with being a part of this global world and not necessarily feeling at home in any one particular spot in it. Welcome to the show. I'm here with Rashid. What's up, buddy?
Hey, how's it going, everybody?
I'm sure they said. And so today's topic is something that I have been going down this kind of rabbit hole about this topic. So there has been a bombshell interview that was released on Monday that hasn't really been picked up by the big news. Let's say. So, I think a few years ago, there were whistleblower protections that were put in place in the U.S. government. And then those whistleblower protections led to whistleblowing. And one of the whistleblowers, a former, I think either military man or high government, has access to this information. His name's Grush, Grusch. He was interviewed on an interview released on Monday, where he goes into detail about how the U.S. and other governments are in possession and are aware of these UAPs. And UAPs stand for Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena. And it stands for that. And you may have heard of them, and they may have been called UFOs before, but they're called UAPs now. And okay, Rashid, I'm going to tell you a lot of interesting things that I've learned today to start this conversation. So first,
Educate me, please.
Okay. So first, let's just go through the brief. So first and foremost, why are they rebranded as UAPs and not UFOs? Okay, or no longer called UFOs. So the reason why is that whenever, let's say, military officials or space people want to, like NASA and all those guys, want to go talk to senators and governors and stuff about things that they find and things of note and things to pay attention to, if they come in with UFO, like any keywords, like the word UFO, the word alien, any of these words, the people they're not going to get listened to. Partly because also senators and governors, if they're like, oh, we have UFOs in the sky that we need to get more information about, their constituents will laugh at them, and it would hurt their re-election things. So by changing the name, it changes the brand. It's a new name, and it allows for them to start to talk about them and take them seriously within the context of saying that UAPs could be from Russia, from China, so that they don't necessarily have to say that they're, hence the word unidentified, right?
Mhm.
And other things that he shared was that apparently Mussolini in 1930 something, his forces find in Italy a downed UAP. They collect it. Information gets to the Vatican. There are letters between the Vatican and the U.S. government that show that the Vatican knows about it and that they're in on this sort of massive cover-up that the U.S. has done over the last 80 years or so to, let's say, protect the population from this information using different methods, up to, and this was from the interview, not me, up to killing people so that they don't share that information that they have, muddying the waters by releasing both fake and real stuff so that people can't, and which has led me to a lot of questions. And I think the questions that we want to discuss. So first and foremost, the first question that came into my head was, what does Islam say about this? What does Christianity say about this? And as soon as I asked you that question, right, when we were talking about
Mhm.
this, your face, because I don't know if did that face where it was like, hey,
Yeah,
shush.
exactly.
Everyone knows what that face
I don't
is.
know.
I don't know if they bring it up. But within Islam, within Christianity, one of the things that they do bring up a lot is the unseen, right? So there are ghosts, there are demons, there are God. There's plenty of room for this, for the unseen, and I think probably more so in Islam than in Christianity. I might be mistaken, or maybe in the Abrahamic religions versus the, let's say, but even in the East, like there's spirits, there are like there is plenty of the unseen. Where this unseen comes from is not necessary. Like you in today's, even in today's like religious, sort of, let's say, more atheistic tendencies in the world now, right? A lot of people talk about the death of religion and it's over and there's no need for it and all that type of stuff. And maybe even within religious circles, people less lean into to the to the ghosts and the demons and the possessions and all that type of stuff. Maybe people don't lean into that stuff as much anymore. They might accept it, they may not, and everybody sits. They might be ridiculed for accepting it. That happens as well. But I just wonder how this entire, where, like, I'm playing a thought experiment where how would all of this information, let's say it's true. So hence the thought of let's assume that, okay, yeah, you know what, there are, and they're way more advanced, and they're out there, and they're not just out there, they're here too, and they've come, they visited, and what does that do to, like, religion? What does that do to?
See, the thing is that, yeah, you touched on upon a couple of things that, Islamically speaking, at least, it goes as far as like the jinn, so the spirit world and all that kind of stuff, and the acceptance of the spirit world and how their people's travel chronicles in the past and like the ancient people, like Islamic travelers and thinkers discuss, like this is a discussion within Islamic history.
Mm,
I find my experience with Christianity in general, it's not as big in scope. It's acknowledged, it's just, but it's not. I find that it's not as discussed as much as it would have been in Islamic history and in Judaism as well. There's a lot of discussions in the Old Testament, especially. There's a lot of discussions about like pseudo demons or spirits, but that can also be attributed to the fact of the reality of where a lot of these stories come from. And a lot of the stories come from people hallucinating in the desert, for example.
yeah.
So it could just be a fake hallucination. Who knows? But I find in terms of the relationship between discussions of the unknown, especially in the spirit world, is a lot stronger within Judaism and Islam than it is in Christianity as
Mhm.
a whole, per se. But also depends on which Christianity you're talking about.
Yeah,
I find
yes.
the
Yeah,
Eastern part, like the Orthodox part, like Greek Orthodox, like the different
yeah.
orthodoxies, they discuss it. There's actually quite a few discussions, and a lot of it comes from cultural history where the pre-Christian cultures and peoples from the Orthodox type of traditions within Christianity, a lot of that was adopted from the pre-Christian type of narrative. So that's, in terms of the unseen, that's all I I see. And the thing too is that they're not only jinn, quote unquote, Islamically speaking, they're also created by God. Like they're also a part of God's creation.
Yeah, they're part of God's creation, right? Like the angels, like the
Exactly. Yeah.
there aren't really, are there? There's no devils, and like you said, there's jinn, which are made
Yeah.
of fire, uh, angels, which are made of light, and humans, which are made of clay. They're
Yeah.
made of clay, and that's the stuff that makes us. And then the big story in Islamically was that Iblis, Satan. So I think Iblis's name in English is Satan. Satan, Aba wastakbar. He exhibited pride, like the first sin. Exhibited pride because when they said bow to Adam, and who was made of clay. All the angels bowed, but then he said, "Hey, you made me out of fire, and you made him out of clay. I'm not buying no thing made out of
Yeah.
clay. Like I'm
You
made
made
out of
me out of, you
fire.
made me into something that's greater than clay. So why
Yeah,
am I going to bow down to it?
I'm superior." And even that story, like where does that story happens in the heavens, right? So that
Yeah.
like where that's where things are happening. Heavens is obviously up in the sky,
Mhm.
and so I can imagine, this- I can imagine a world where Muslim scholars can actually, I don't think, I actually think quite easily account for the for ETs and extraterrestrials. I feel like it wouldn't be too far of a stretch considering the the breadth of like and also the track record. Muslims always do this, right? Like when they
Mhm.
some a big scientific discovery, and this is, I guess, the miracle of the Quran. You'll say so. There's a big scientific discovery, and they're like, "Oh, it was written in the
Yeah.
Quran."
Yeah. They pull some random
Uh,
verse and say this,
Yeah.
it's been
What?
there this
Look,
entire
it
time.
clearly it says like I made you from this, and how could he have known? And therefore, it must be true. That type of that logical reasoning
Mm.
is very common, and that could I feel we're
Here's something
primed
else.
for that.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's not that difficult for, I think, within an Islamic mind to accept it, because within the narrative, there's always this concept of, if anything ends up coming true that we didn't know about before, it's easy to attribute it back to say that it's God's creation. God allowed it to happen. God did this with it. We just
Yeah.
didn't have the evidence up until now, type of
Yes.
thing. There's something else that would make it easy for people to accept this UAP UFO thing, is that there is a people in the Quran that was discussed that apparently they have found evidence, and that's the people of Ad. So like the
Yeah.
giants, the
Yeah.
monstrous giant people, where they found evidence of these monstrous giant humans in parts of Saudi, like in the desert in Saudi.
Mm.
And people accept it.
Yeah.
And like they're discussed there's quite a few discussions that they're mentioned in the Quran, etc. And throughout years, scholars have accepted that, yeah, these people existed. We don't know much about them, but we have evidence of these people. And before we found the evidence of these people, it was already mentioned in the Quran. Like, well, it's got to be true. So yeah, that's another element. There are many things that the Islamic mind is primed to just readily accept. There are other things it's not readily primed to accept
Yes.
or
Yeah.
doesn't want to accept.
Yeah.
We can but one of the things is a huge discussion right now, but we
Mm.
won't get into that. Um, See, the thing for me is this, is that two things. So one, when you're just talking about the different things that humans and the spirits and the angels, what they're created from, it automatically brought my mind to the show His Dark Materials in the book series, because of the big discussion of dust and what dust is, and how there's this big
I've never heard of this
the
show.
oh, you haven't? Oh,
No.
His Dark Materials is freaking amazing. I love the show. And it's
Okay.
based on books by Philip Pullman. And then it became into a show. Lin-Manuel Miranda, he's a part of
Oh
the show.
yeah.
Like, he has a small little part in the
Do,
show. And
do
he's
people break out
freaking,
and
he's
dance?
amazing.
Is it a musical?
No, no.
Like
It's
I
not
feel
that.
like
But there's this whole thing, like this concept of dust, and how dust is basically the source of creation of everything. But
okay. Yeah. Fair enough.
the Emporium, these, and there's layers of realities. There's layers of different worlds, and they're all on these different strands, and how people have the ability to go between different worlds. But the problem is, like, there's the big authority that wants to keep this in check. And there's like this theory of this big angel that's supposedly trying to keep this from everybody in order to maintain order throughout the world. But then McAvoy, his character is Azrael. He's basically trying to um, expose the lie and get to this angel and
Yeah.
destroy it and create a new
Right.
world, type of thing. So that's one thing that it took me to my brain to that, where there's all these different type of narratives where it's just like creation has this thing, this little spark. And obviously, Islamically speaking, the spark would be God's will, like God's doing of something to make something happen and become and be. So that was the one thing that my brain went to. And the second thing that it went to was it would be within the realm, generally speaking, of if these UFOs and UAPs exist, Islamically speaking, it has to be within the context of God created it or God
Yeah.
had some kind of hand in it. And last night, I was watching this show where this telescope was put up back in 1989 to go and study this star that was found. And when they started doing calculations on its age, they realized that it was older than what they believed the universe to be. So they believed the universe at this time was 13 billion years old plus 0.3 billions or whatever. And were starting to calculate that this actual star, Methuselah, was older than that by about 2 billion years. And they're like, how can that be? And I'm sitting there watching the show and I'm going, maybe that was the bang. Maybe that star was the bang and it's just doing its thing. Maybe that star is God. I don't know. Maybe we have the manifestation of God as a star now. Who knows? But so, Islamically speaking, within that kind of context, there's a lot of room for discussion for those type of things. It's not a taboo subject.
No, no. It's not. Probably the taboo that I imagine this exists a bit more in Christianity and less so in like both Judaism, Islam, and others is the mystical, right? So William James like talks a lot about this in all of his books, right? Where he talks about looks into mysticism, looks into the mystical, and there's plenty of room and belief for that. And when you tie, there's a famous quote, right? If you got technology from, let's say, 100,000 or a million years in the future, and it appeared to us today, it would be indistinguishable from magic, right? If you took a cell phone, right, or a radio even, and go back 1,000 years ago and pull out a radio, that's a magic box.
Yeah.
And that the human mind has sort of space for magic, has space for the mystical, the unseen, and religion provides a framework to make sense of it. And let's say certain religions are let's say better placed in order to to converse with or to play with or to sit with the ideas of extraterrestrials in the in the case that evidence, like irrefutable evidence, appears that says, like, yo, here it is, like,
Yeah.
here's the
Yeah.
body, here's the saucer, the flying saucer. Fun
Yeah.
fact.
Because
Yeah.
within Judaism, Kabbalah, and within Islam, Sufism are very well developed strands of
Mysticism.
thought.
Yeah, yeah,
Like the mysticism within Islam and Judaism is extremely well developed. I
yeah,
don't know what happened with Christianity. It's almost like it became monastic, where it's became like where it's you want to do that, go and be a monk.
yeah. Well,
Don't do it in the real world. Where within Jewish traditions or like within Jewish cultural traditions in life in society in Islamic societies, it was within the regular world, not so much today, but there's a history of it where it existed with the mystic type of
yeah.
reality of
Well,
religion.
there were limitations, I think, like
Yeah.
that, at least with Roman Catholicism, also because of y sometimes your history or you are defined by what you are what you are the anti of, and the anti-Roman Catholicism or anti-Catholicism at the time, I think, where it was paganism, and paganism had a lot of obviously mystical, the mystical experience, the shamans and all that type of stuff. And so that,
Yeah, and it was borderline witchcraft. We're not dealing
and
with the
well,
witchcraft.
and yeah, and like, so then you have to stamp that out even out of your own tradition so that you differentiate yourself from the other side.
Yeah,
And so that probably is, I mean, I think, I don't know, not, maybe not probably, but theoretically would be a reason why they would distance themselves from that.
theoretically, and I
Yeah.
would say that it's really a Roman Catholic. Specifically, what I'm talking about is
Yeah.
is like within Roman Catholicism, and it's what it ended up controlling in terms of territory and where it became popular religions. It's a lot more. It's a lot more restricted within those type of realms than the Eastern traditions, because the Eastern traditions are readily accepting of mystical type of philosophies.
Yes. I
Historically,
mean,
it's
yeah,
much
yeah.
more accepting.
The shaman was the beginning, and even Islamically, we have in Islamically the story of Isra and Mi'raj, the
Mm,
ascent to heaven, the prophet ascent to heaven. That is generally so for Muslim for Muslims, let's say, or believing Muslims, you believe that, right? Like, yes, totally, that's what happened, and like it wasn't just a mystical experience too; it was an actual physical
it was
experience.
real. It's
Yeah,
believed to
yeah,
be real.
it's yeah, yeah, and often that is what is like that is used as a point of ridicule for by like the other side, right? The
Yeah.
anti-Muslims or the and but then going back to that quote of right, like even a future technology, an advanced technology will be seen as magic. Does it open up the oh wow, I just does it open up the door to explaining historical legend and myth with uh ET, right? Because once you have the proof, once you see it, right, or it's there, and okay, no, it's been there, we've been hiding it. Sorry, cat's out of the bag, right?
Mhm.
Um, then do you go back and you go, whoa, okay, now the pyramids make sense. Okay, now this makes sense. That oh wow, so they've been explaining things to us. Like now, like all of these, like the ascent makes sense. The descent like makes sense. So then all of this kind of stuff comes into play, and this is truly the space of science fiction, in the sense that's like literally the show that you just talked about is a show based off a book that I'm also watching that almost sounds exactly the same. So I'm watching. I read a book by Hugh Howey years ago called Silo, and it was awesome. And like I think the history of the book was that the guy wrote like the first like an epilogue. And then the epilogue it was just a little chapter, and it got so popular that he got a book deal. So he wrote then the book, and then he wrote 3 books, and uh, and now the show. And I don't wanna burn anything because it's absolutely awesome, and that's why the book was really awesome too, is that every chapter there was, like, another twist similar to Game of Thrones. But the premise is that human beings live in a silo underground. Nobody the earth is not, like, habitable. They only got, like, one screen that, like, shows the earth as being uninhabitable, and they
Mhm.
live in this silo underneath the ground where everybody lives in the silo, and it's all levels down the ladder, and everybody's got a job, and there are various departments that run the whole place.
It's it's corporatism under
Yeah, yeah,
Egypt,
like
under Gamal Abdel Nasser. Everyone
yeah,
has their
yeah.
role.
Everyone's got their role that they do, and like I highly recommend it because I absolutely love this type of stuff, and you might too. But
Mhm.
it's similar also to to Battlestar Galactica,
Mm.
uh, and it's the same. You know what happens when the diversity of humanity whittled down to one place, and that's all that's left. And you got the engineers, and then you got the like creatives, and you got the leaders, and you got the like everybody with their qualities, and they come together, and then and it brings existential questions to about like why do we exist? Not how do we exist, but why do we exist? What's the point of us continuing to breathe and to be here? And that question usually is the realm of religion, right? The
But
why
here's the
we're here.
thing. So this brings me to something else, the why, the huge why question. So let's just say, hypothetically speaking, ETs exist and they're in some far off galaxy on some other planet somewhere else, and they look different than us. They have different makeup, whatever it is, and all that kind of stuff. And they don't, let's just say they don't need oxygen to breathe. They need CO2 to breathe. Or maybe could be a reason why they don't come to Earth, because there's too much oxygen in the air and
Yeah.
they can, and they'll
And
die.
and that's poison to them. Yeah.
It's poison, absolute poison to them. It does pose a problem to religion in a sense of saying, if why aren't they ever discussed in our religious text then? Like, there's no mention of them anywhere. For example, like the dinosaurs, there's no mention of them, but there's so much evidence of dinosaurs existing on Earth. There's so much evidence on Earth when they do scientific testing of the different time periods of Earth that existed, and they have all the different, like, the crossroads of where time periods ended and a new time period began. And then within that, they say these sets of dinosaurs lived in this time period, but they didn't live in this time period because they died off or whatever it is, and this new dinosaur developed. There's always these type of questions. So then it almost is as if, I mean, I guess the one answer could be, if that is true, that is irrelevant to our reality here, in a sense of everything that is discussed in terms of like religious law and religious guidance and religious history and people's histories within a religious context and development of the earth and creation and everything and earth in general and how it's developed. What's happened in that far off place in the galaxy is irrelevant to what's happening here, and those religious texts that are here are only relevant for our lives here as human beings in relation to the world in which we live. But at the same time, it's almost as if, wouldn't someone feel slightly cheated at some point to be like, we are made to sound so special within the religious texts, but then but then there could be this other evidence of this other thing where, if it's religiously speaking, that had to be created by the same God. What about them? Why are we as special? Like, it creates a huge dilemma in being able to understand the relationship between the two. If in or it not even the two, how many others are there?
Yeah. You can imagine uh, an intergalactic, I mean, like a Star Trek type of, like, there's a whole
Yeah.
bunch of them, and they have United Nations, let's say, where they sit down and chat about those pesky little humans, and how are we gonna stop them from killing themselves? Because they just seem to constantly try to kill themselves.
Mhm.
Right? Like, man, I so possibly, I think possibly that there is that, but I think where it does tie is, and like a big role or a big function of religion, whether it was meant or not, is it provides a story where we can place context around our lives, and it gives us context. Islamically, right, there is no reference to dinosaurs, but like there is a reference uh, to time, in the
Mm.
sense that, like, there'll be, for example, one example is the prophets that are mentioned, like prophets and messengers that are mentioned in the Quran and stuff, and there's like a set number. But then there's also a verse that says some of them we told you about and some of them we didn't tell you about, which means, and like, now it's up for estimate. So that there are people that that are sanctioned prophets from God that we don't know about. And so when you look at history and you point to a person, and I feel like almost the point of that is that when you then point to a person that isn't amongst the, let's say, Abrahamic tradition of prophets, you cannot n- uh you can't remove the possibility that the same God sent the message to that person just because that person isn't listed on your list. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I just want to make a quick for some who may not know the difference between a prophet and a messenger in Islamic terms. A prophet is an individual who was sent to a people as guidance. But a messenger is both a prophet and a messenger, and the difference is a messenger is a person who was sent with a book.
Yeah.
So a prophet could be a leader but doesn't have an actual book, whereas a messenger is a leader as a prophet but actually has a quote unquote physical book of actual guidance and rules and laws, and it's legislation, I
Yeah.
guess you can say.
And yeah.
That's interesting that you say that, because one discussion that I have found to be quite large within that context of canceling out one, accepting another prophet or messenger is Buddha.
Yeah. That's
There's been a huge discussion about him as is he considered a prophet within like the Islamic realm or not?
in terms of his message.
And also, if they say, some would say, yeah, he was, but then was he a messenger now? Because can you accept his book? Because there are contradictions between the book that is attributed to Buddha to what the Islamic God is.
Yeah. That's the one that, in university religious classes, Islamic religious, they talk about this. They talk specifically, and they use Buddha as the example because Islamically, there are others. Another one is the dinosaurs. With the dinosaurs, there is a big period of time, I think, because the Earth. The, this was always interesting growing up. So I would
Mm-hmm.
listen to these stories and these myths, and I've been believing them, like very literally growing up. And now I go look back at them as a result of, and I go, okay, they allowed for things. So they allowed for dinosaurs because the Earth, even though God creates the Earth and He creates land, creates everything, 7 days and everything like that, and then He creates Adam in the heavens and He does all that stuff. Uh, there is no timeline between when the Earth is made and when Adam is made. And so
Mm-hmm.
in that time, and there is a reference to the Earth being covered in like demons, like the jinn lived on the Earth, right? Like the jinn were the thing on the Earth, and the people and the thing. And so all of that time frame, you can allow for the discovery of the Jurassic Age, the discovery of the
Here's the thing too, as well. Like, even still, the Earth was created in X amount of days, whatever. But even still, between each day, quote unquote, each time, no, there is no measurement of time between the two either.
yeah.
Yeah, I see what you're saying in terms of Islam within the Islamic narrative or the Quranic narrative. There is room for the in between
Yeah.
of the different time periods. But I
Well, I
guess no
mean,
one's really,
even time,
it's not really been fleshed out
but even time,
fully.
right? Like time itself. Okay, one of the other thing. Time itself is an illusion that or is a thing that arises due to the way that we experience the present, right? So we live under the we live under the confused notion that the present arises from the past, and that isn't necessarily true because the the past actually comes up from the present. It's the other way around. Because when you think about the present and you existing, right? You look around, you look at your you look at your feet, you look at your hands, and then you look at me and you see that I have a head. And so you assume that you have a head, and you assume that you yourself exist in behind the kind of nub of nose that you could see off the front of your eyes. And so you assume that you have a head just because everybody else has got one. And you look in a mirror and then you can see. And so you assume that's where yourself exists, but then in general, like you are living in the moments of those things happening. And you lock on to like you think that a series of events lead to this event, but it's actually this event that has given rise to the history of events, because it's from this moment where you recall those events and whatever that, like, whatever electromagnetic process that happens in the mechanical function of your brain. It all arises from there. I know it's real trippy.
Oh, I know, because like but you still can't deny the fact that
Yeah, it's
you
so
know
counterintuitive.
the present is a result of the past.
How do you know that? Which is that's my question. Like, don't answer that question. But that's the question that you ask. Like, how do you actually know that? How do you know that you don't like? How do you know that you're not in a matrix, right? Where it's all just been uploaded and it's not actually coming from the past. That
Oh, I said this
like,
last night. I said it when I was watching that whole show about the star and everything. I'm like, whatever, just in a matrix, and this is all computer generated crap. And then my roommates, yeah, but then why would there people being rich and there's millionaires and billionaires and there's other people who are dying and they're suffering? It's like, did that guy pay more money for a better hookup than you did? Like,
well, yeah, that you is it you play the dance? I think in some Eastern philosophies, the like the universe is playing a really long game with itself where it's hiding from itself. Like, it's hiding from itself, and then it finds itself, and then it gets bored that it found itself, and so it goes back into hiding and forgets that it went into hiding, and it just goes through this cycle of finding itself and hiding from itself and finding, similar to a dog chasing its own tail. And
right.
that the universe is a dog just chasing its own tail. Boing, 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 like Tom and Jerry. And yeah, so it's interesting that we went into this place and talking about the science fiction, the mystical, and what I wonder, I do, how much of our sort of third culture experience lends to our ability to have this conversation and to entertain these ideas, and are third culture kids more, like, my big question is our third culture kids more inclined to play with these ideas and or to without, let's say, fear, or maybe with more wonder, awe, veneration than dismissal, due to their nature of being from everywhere and nowhere and being at home everywhere and nowhere, like, due to the looseness of what home is to a third culture kid.
Yeah, I think there is. We're going to talk in a general sense because of that reality. Yes, I would say that a third culture kid would be more open to the discussion, but at the same time, you don't. Everyone has their own sensibilities and concerns about what life is, and somebody there's concern about making money and doing their thing, and they don't care about what's outside. So I'm no yes and no. It's for me, it's a tough question to answer, but I think if you're going to take it from the standpoint of someone who is super religious, let's say, like someone who's like Muslim and they're super religious, and I think it would think on that context, they'll be more readily open to accept it because then everything always comes back down to the fact if God willed it, then it's real
Then it fits. Yeah.
and it's allowed and it fits within that. But if you're more skeptical of religion, even still, you won't rationalize it within the religious context. You'll end up if you're skeptical of religion, you're more on the scientific side. So then you're going to rationalize it within science.
Yeah, yeah, you're gonna look for some sort of worldview to provide a narrative where it allows you to exist and continue to make sense. Because once
Yeah.
you because in the same way that when a comet comes and it just blows everything up, or a meteor lands and it just takes everything out, it's similar in that in to that intellectually. And unless you have a sort of a net to be able to catch that meteor, or to limit the damage, let's say, or even integrate it into your worldview, then you're going to really be in trouble. And I feel like that's the the, the strength. That is the, maybe the function of a religious worldview of religion, which is to provide a greater context that exists beyond your individual life to allow for things that you're going to find to help you make decisions when it comes to your life and what you want to do. And it gives you the great, another thing that religion does, even in teaching through myth and through story, is it teaches values. So when you look at the story we talked about earlier of Satan and Iblis exhibiting pride, that is the lesson to young people who hear that story, that pride is a sin, and
Yeah.
thinking that you're better than others is the sin. And so humble yourself, because we all should be humbled in front of God, right? And
Right.
and so that is the value that is taught through the story, or one of the values that is taught through the story and other stories like it. And that tradition teaches young people and keeps that value alive. And so religion is a big picture story. And again, the difference between, like, I think you said it clearly, is that if you had something like in Catholicism where there's not room for that, they would run into more trouble with that type of, with these outside things, and would be, let's say, encouraged to either silence it or ignore it or to put it aside in order to maintain their worldview, because there isn't room. It's not as fluid, let's say.
I have a crazy thought.
Oh, like all the
What
others
if
we're saying that we just had right now. Okay.
what if the UAPs or the UFOs or whatever they are jinn?
That would fly. That would totally fly. Especially if they could go invisible.
Yeah.
Because that's the whole,
That's
the
the whole thing.
jinn.
They're so invisible.
They're
Evidence
they're
of them, but they're invisible at the
they're
same
among
time.
us, right? Like they're among us. Like Islamically, the jinn are among us. Like they're not.
Yeah.
They live here, but they live in an unseen world. So they
Yeah.
live in another, let's say, in another
In a different realm or a different layer.
or a parallel universe. Yeah, they live in a different layer.
Yeah, like the metaverse thing. It's a thing.
Yeah,
It's
like,
not, the metaverse thing is not that far fetched, Islamically speaking, either.
no, that's probably where we're gonna meet. They need to put their thing on. We need to put our thing on. Well, I'll see you guys in augmented reality.
Yeah.
See, it's not that crazy,
No, it's
right?
not.
No.
Within
And
it
I could
and
totally,
like even I can even see
I could picture that sermon.
like a lot of religions out of the Indian subcontinent. Like I can see Hinduism getting on board with that kind of thing as well. I can see
No, yeah, like saying like, "I
like
told you so." I told you so.
there's so much room within religions that have developed in the Indian subcontinent, at least for this type of unseen world.
Yeah.
It's a real thing.
And I think also within sort of native religions, right? Whatever has like
Huge, huge,
lasted.
big
Yeah,
time,
yeah,
big time.
it's huge. I mean,
There's so
like,
much reverence of the spirits and the
yeah,
ancestors and how they relate to the earth and the land and life and how they guide people. How the spirits and the ancestors guide people today in their lives, and there's always this reverence back to them, to the spirits, and respect and all that kind of stuff.
yeah. So I think a big part of today's worldview, let's say the modern worldview, sort of outside of that, is that it comes from the Enlightenment principles, and a big part of that was the mechanical view of the world, and 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 that it has been the sort of the overall, like, paintbrush that has been painted all over the world, and that's what we carry. And I think now that sort of new windows open, either through the extraterrestrials, the otherworldly things, or the internal, like, um, uh, mushroom-led journeys, the
Mhm.
internal the internal quest for enlightenment, let's just say.
An
Let's just
LSD quest.
yeah, let's just call that. But the internal like thing or the external stuff has now opened doors, let's say, or opened windows into the how short it has been since the Enlightenment. Like how little time that
Mm.
had that worldview has had to be tested by reality. And you look at Judaism, you look at like Hinduism, you look at even Hinduism is a very big word. Judaism is a very big word to describe a lot of different things. But they're ancient for a reason, right? They're ancient because they have been able to, even though it's only 5,000 years, it's only 5,000, but it's been able to take in, to absorb, to adjust to changing realities around it, and it hasn't
Mhm.
gone anywhere. And that is the test of a religious worldview. Because let's say if it's all built around, let's say example, some stories where it's all built around one divine figure, that person's alive, then that person dies, then the thing falls apart. Because it was all like the world was not made to like last longer than 20, 30, 40, 50 years, however long that person lived. Um, because it just wasn't strong enough. And that's how we measure like today, let's say we measure the strength of a religion is okay, well, how long did it last? I've heard that. If it's old, then there's got to be something there, right?
Yeah.
Zoroastrian, there's got to be something there that makes it last this long, that has allowed it to last this long, despite all of these things. And then maybe with the Enlightenment, we are seeing the like maybe the inherent drawbacks of the mechanical worldview, and it just doesn't last, right? Then it gets hit because even the technologies, like ET technology, is in the case that there are like civilizations and stuff, and they're able to break the speed of light, for example. Like we know scientifically that you cannot break the speed of light, right? Because you can't break that thing. But then they do, right? Because they use some other technology that we're unaware of entirely. Anti-gravity, dark matter, yada yada yada. We have no idea.
Cloaking technology like in Star Trek.
Yeah, exactly. All that like crazy stuff that like they're like, there's no way. Or they jump through portals to land in and all this type of stuff
Wormholes.
that yeah,
Wormholes.
wormholes. And so we had no idea about that stuff. And then that puts a big hole in our scientific understanding, our mechanical understanding of the universe, because we break it all down into parts and bits and pieces. But even the whole issue with that then, even already, is that once we got into the quantum levels uh, of reality,
Mhm.
we all of the rules for the physical world go out the window, right? And then you're in dire straits. Like you're in real trouble because now you're trying to explain things according to probability and not according to like probabilities and statistics and not according to like where they are. Like something can be in two or three different spots at the same time. And that's wild. And like this one always blows my mind. This is one of my favorite like bits of is that if you look at the size of an atom
Mm.
and you look at the distance between the nucleus of the atom and the electron going around, and you extrapolate that into a larger thing so you could see, that amount of space between the electron and the atom is huge, right? I can't remember the story, but it's a big huge space. And we're made up of atoms, right? Atoms put together. But if a majority of atoms or if atoms are made up of space, like mostly space, then
Mm.
how do you have stuff?
Mm.
Like, how do you have
I know.
physical matter if the ground piece is all space? Is and that one I can't wrap my head around that one. Like that one is like one of those where like, oh man, you need a serious imagination, like Einstein level imagination, to begin
Mhm.
to like A understand that, and then B start to toy with it. And to say, okay, obviously. I would like to say, obviously, of course you do. You gotta be a little weird.
'Cause then that brings, like, so if we're made of that, and there's space between the core. If,
Building block.
if there's the core building blocks of things, is part of it is like a massive amount of space, literally, in our world. Then you're like, what's happening with the other one? Then is it the same type of stuff going on? Like, and then now your brain starts going
Well,
freaking,
yeah, and then have
and
you
you're like,
found a
I,
way to go
like,
through, and then do we exist on multiple planes at the same time? Like, all of that, like,
mm,
string theory, like, you can keep going, and then you can pick up a science fiction book, and suddenly it looks like a science book.
quantum physics.
Yeah, yeah.
The hell is
And
going on?
then you start going into all of these things, and really, then the only answer I feel is to go to religion. And then what's the lesson? Humble yourself. You don't know shit, son.
Right.
Don't think that you are the master of the universe just because you like. Don't fall under that mistake, that problem. That don't do the same as Iblis. Don't do the same as Satan. Don't be like
Mm.
that. That's the whole lesson. And so then I feel like it actually makes you, and if you're coming from anywhere but a Roman Catholicism worldview, it actually makes you more religious. Like it'll be like, okay, thanks for that, God. Thanks for that lesson. I need that now. Like I definitely need to humble myself in front of this information. And so that's where that's so interesting, right? That's that I think that distinction between, because so much of what we get when I think the world talks about religion is they're talking about Catholicism, right?
Mhm.
When they're talking, at least in the West, I feel like it's the end of religion as we know it, is that they're not necessarily taking into account Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Shinto, Tao, like all of these like religions that uh, are different. Like they hold a lot of similarities in terms of, but they're also different in terms of how they view the world, the unseen world, how they accept the existence of the unseen world, ancestors, spirits, so on and so forth. And the even the mirror of that within you, right? Like the mirror of everything outside within you. It's deep stuff. It's deep stuff.
I just wanted to make a point when, if we're gonna go back, just for context sake, I'm reading something here quickly about Iblis. And just for context of those who don't know much about him, there's an original version of his story where he was Azazel. So one of the high ranking angels before his downfall.
Hmm.
So if anyone's listening and they wanted to have some kind of connection between the story of Iblis, if they know nothing about it, Azazel is a starting point.
And is Azazel's in
Azazel was one of the high ranking angels who ended up being associated with the devils because of his pride.
okay.
Basically, I'll just give you a quick thing. He was appointed by God to obliterate the original disobedient inhabitants of Earth,
The dinosaurs.
who were replaced with humans as more obedient creatures.
See? The dinosaurs. They didn't listen too much.
And then it goes into after he objected to God's decision to create a successor, a Khalifa, he was punished by being relegated and cast down to earth as a shaitan. And then things change, and then there's different stories of, and then he was created from fire and all that kind of stuff. And then
I mean, that's kind of
we get into the Islamic context.
that's my point, is that there's a lot of this, right, that you can pull from that would allow you to actually accept. So I guess my argument here is that if there is ET evidence that comes to play, then it's not necessarily the death of religion. It may be the death of some religions. It might be the death of the or let's say the religion of science. Let's say the like that religion, the
Yeah.
religion that has arisen that we don't like. Remember that mantra, right? We follow the silence, follow the science.
Mhm.
Like that religion, it might be the downfall of that one. because that's going to be tough to explain. Maybe or maybe not. That's a different conversation. But I don't think it's necessarily the death of all religion. I think the religion has been able to withstand like a lot of changes throughout history, and especially the long ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, and you know what? Even for Scientology, that doesn't sound crazy. Yeah.
Oh,
But for
that'd be
Scient
huge for Scientology.
yeah, they'd be like all over this. They'd be like, "Man, I told you." Actually, I didn't tell you. I wasn't allowed to. But that's what we said from day one. Please, thank you very much, everybody, for
Oh,
enjoying.
before we
But
close, there's also the
I'm wrapped.
possibility
Yeah.
outside of religious realms is that all of these unidentified objects, UAPs, and everything like that are just military expeditions and experiments with technology. So there's that possibility as well.
It's you, skeptic. Thanks for listening. I hope you got something out of this. It's really interesting how uh, the all of this stuff is really interesting. I hope it keeps your mind open with wonder and excitement. Let us know what you think in the comments. Do you think that that the possible existence of UAPs equals the end of religion, or is there uh, room for religion, or there's absolutely no way there are UAPs, man? What are you talking about? Just stick to the word UFOs and aliens, please. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks a lot. If you like this episode, like, subscribe, share, write, subscribe, or share. And
Like,
we're,
subscribe, and share. There we go.
yeah, and we'll see you. We'll tune in next week for another episode. Peace, peace, guys.
Bye.